Tiswadi, banks of the Mandovi River, Tiswadi Island. Dawn rises slowly above the Mandovi River. Mist drifts across the still water. The air smells of wet earth and coconut husks. Fishing boats slide through the current without voices. Across the river, the towers of old Goa appear in pale light. Stone walls, white churches, crosses catching the first sun. Soon the bells begin. One bell, then another. Their sound rolls across the fields of Tiswadi, through coconut groves, across the quiet riverbanks. In a small house near the water, a family wakes before sunrise. The courtyard is swept clean, but the shrine remains dark. The wooden altar stands empty. No oil lamp burns there now. Last night, the father placed the Ganesh Murti inside a chest, wrapped carefully in cotton cloth, hidden beneath folded garments. His son watched the entire act. The boy said nothing, but his eyes followed every movement. For generations, this family began each morning before that altar. The lamp was lit. Incense filled the room. A bell rang 3 soft notes. Then came the familiar mantras. Names of the devas spoken quietly. Names learned from fathers and grandfathers. This morning, the room is silent. The bell does not ring. The window shutters remain closed. Even whispers feel dangerous. The father kneels beside the chest. His hands pause on the wooden lid. He listens first. Outside, a rooster calls somewhere beyond the trees. Footsteps pass along the village path. Then silence returns. Slowly he lifts the lid. Inside lies the wrapped cloth. He unfolds it carefully. The small form of Ganesha appears in dim light. Elephant head, rounded belly, stone worn smooth by generations of touch. The father bows his head. His son kneels beside him. No mantra is spoken aloud. The prayer moves only through memory. Across the river, the bells of old Goa continue ringing. Not far from those churches, another building now stands. A tribunal established in the year 1560. The Tribunal of the Inquisition. Its duty is not only to punish crime. Its duty is to examine belief, not actions alone, belief itself. Neighbors may whisper, servants may report. Those who confess their practices may be spared. Those who conceal them may face accusation. The father lowers his voice further. His palms fold before the hidden deity. His son imitates the gesture. The boy does not understand the law. He does not know the name of the tribunal. But he understands fear. He understands secrecy. And he understands that Ganesha must now remain hidden. Outside, the Mandovi River flows toward the sea. Boats move slowly toward the markets of old Goa. Traders unload sacks of rice and spices. Life continues along the river. But something essential has changed. Temples that once rang with bells now stand silent. Courtyards that once held festivals remain empty. In Tiswadi, Dharma has moved indoors, into small rooms, into quiet hands, into memory. The boy looks once more at the small stone Ganesha. He will remember this morning, long after the bells of old Goa fade. Because this is how a civilization survives its first years of fear. Quietly, hidden, waiting. The Mandovi River still moves toward the sea. Rice fields ripple under the coastal wind. Fishermen launch their boats before sunrise. The rhythm of the land continues. But the order of life begins to change. The change begins not with battle. It begins with decrees. Orders issued by the Portuguese crown. Orders read aloud in village squares. Orders carried by missionaries and colonial officials. The language of the decree is simple. Hindu temples are to be destroyed. Public worship of Hindu deities is forbidden. Festivals dedicated to the devas are prohibited. Priests must abandon their rites. Temple lands are to be confiscated. These are not rumors, they are law. Across the villages of Tiswadi, temples that stood for generations begin to fall. Stone by stone, beam by beam. Some temples are burned, others are stripped of their sacred images. Temple bells fall silent, shrines stand empty, sacred courtyards gather dust and weeds. On Diwar Island, the ancient temple of Saptakoteshwara is dismantled. For centuries, that shrine honored Shiva. Kings once worshipped there. Pilgrims crossed the river to reach it. Now its stones are scattered. Its courtyard stands abandoned. Further south in Kortalim, the shrine of Sri Mangisha faces the same fate. The temple that sheltered the linga of Shiva is dismantled under the new policy. The Murti will not remain there long. But that story will come later. The destruction spreads beyond Tiswadi. It moves north into Bardesh. It moves south into Saschet. Together, these regions form what the Portuguese call the Velas Conquistas, the old conquests. In village after village, the pattern repeats itself. Temple, edict, confiscation, silence. In Varna of Saschet, the temple of Mahalasa Narayani is abandoned. The goddess who once received daily offerings now stands without her shrine. The temple courtyard empties. The pilgrims disappear. Where lamps once burned, before the Devas, new churches soon rise. White walls, high crosses, bells calling another congregation. The temple had never been only a place of worship. It was the center of village life. Festivals began there, marriages were celebrated there, disputes were settled there, food was shared there, pilgrims gathered there. When the temple disappears, the village loses its center. The Portuguese administration records every change. Registers of converts grow longer each year. Missionaries report their progress. Officials document confiscated lands and dismantled temples. And the tribunal in Old Goa listens carefully. Its duty is vigilance, especially toward those who appear Christian but secretly maintain Hindu practice. Such people receive a new description: Cristãos da terra who relapse into idolatry, Christians of the land who return to their former devas. Investigations begin quietly: a lamp seen burning before a hidden murti, rice offerings placed before a household shrine, a wedding performed with Sanskrit mantras. Small acts become evidence. Evidence becomes accusation. Across Tiswadi, families slowly change their habits. Shrines disappear from public rooms. Temple festivals fade from calendars. Rituals move behind closed doors. A bell no longer rings in the courtyard. A lamp burns only in secret. Children grow up without seeing the temples their grandparents knew. Yet the Mandovi River continues its journey. Boats still travel toward the markets of Old Goa. Trade continues, harvests continue, life continues. But something deeper has shifted. The visible structure of dharma has been dismantled. The sacred geography of the Velas conquistas has changed. Where temples once stood, silence spreads across the land. And silence travels quickly, faster than soldiers, faster than proclamations, because fear moves from house to house. And by the end of the 16th century, many families begin to leave. They cross rivers, they cross forests, they travel toward lands beyond Portuguese rule, toward places where temples still stand, where bells still ring, where the names of the devas may still be spoken aloud. But those who remain in Tiswadi must learn another way, a quieter way, a hidden way. Because when temples fall silent, faith does not disappear. It waits. By the end of the 16th century, the people of the Velas conquistas faced a decision. Some remained, others began to leave. The departures did not happen all at once. They began quietly. One family crossed the river, another sold its land. A priest disappeared from a village shrine. Soon, the paths beyond Tiswari grew busier. Families traveled by night. They moved through coconut groves and riverbanks. They carried bundles of clothing and grain. But some travelers carried something more sacred. Temple priests began removing the murtis, stone images worshipped for generations, images bathed daily with water and milk, images carried in festivals beneath bright lamps. Now, those same images traveled in silence. A murti was wrapped in cloth, placed carefully inside a basket, carried across the river at night. No bells announced the journey. No drums marked the departure. Even the mantras were whispered. Some journeys lasted only a single night. Others stretched across many days. Families walked through forest paths unfamiliar to them. Children walked beside elders carrying small bundles. Cattle moved slowly behind the travelers. Priests guarded baskets wrapped in layers of cloth. Inside those cloths rested sacred murtis, images worshipped by generations, images that could not be abandoned. At river banks, the travelers waited for darkness. Boats crossed quietly beneath moonlight. For the priests understood one truth clearly: if the murti survived, the temple could live again. If the murti was lost, a lineage of worship could disappear. So they carried the deities carefully, across rivers, across fields, across forests where Portuguese authority did not reach. The journeys moved inland, beyond colonial decrees, beyond the reach of the tribunal, toward territories ruled by Hindu chiefs, toward villages where temples still stood. One such journey began at Kortalim. The ancient shrine of Sri Mangesha could not remain there. The temple had been dismantled, but the linga of Shiva had to survive. Priests carried the sacred image across the Mandovi. They traveled through fields and forests. Eventually, they reached a village in Ponda. There, the temple would rise again. Stone walls would be rebuilt. Oil lamps would burn once more. Another journey began in Kelosim. The goddess Shanta Durga once received offerings there. Pilgrims had traveled long distances to her shrine. But the temple could not remain under Portuguese rule. Her murti was carried away quietly, across rivers, across forest paths, until it reached Kavale in Ponda. There, a new temple slowly emerged. Farther south in Varna, the temple of Mahalasa Narayani faced destruction. The goddess could not remain there. Her image began another secret journey, wrapped in cloth, guarded by priests and villagers, carried across the countryside, until it reached Mardol, where another temple would rise. Inland villages began receiving these travelers. The first temples there were modest, wooden structures, palm leaf roofs, simple shrines built quickly for protection. But inside those humble sanctuaries, ancient deities were installed again. Oil lamps burned once more. Mantras returned. The displaced sacred geography of Goa began to take root in new soil. Not every family left. Some remained within Portuguese territory. For them, the path was different. Children received baptismal names. Public rituals disappeared. Festivals faded from the calendar. Yet even among those who remained, older habits did not vanish completely. A lamp burned quietly in a corner. A story of the Devas was whispered to a child. An ancestral memory survived in silence. Two roads now shaped the future of Goa. One road led inland, toward villages where temples rose again, where bells rang again, where festivals returned. The other road remained within the Velas Conquistas, where churches dominated the skyline, where public life followed the rhythms of a new faith. Both roads carried memory. Both roads carried loss. But along the forest paths of Ponda, something remarkable began to happen. Temples rose again, not in the same places, not under the same rulers, but with the same deities, the same mantras, the same devotion. The sacred geography had shifted, yet Dharma continued to breathe, because the people carried it with them, across rivers, across forests, across fear. When the Portuguese first arrived in Goa, most of the population was Hindu. Temples shaped the sacred geography. Village calendars followed the rhythms of the Devas. Pilgrims traveled between shrines along the Mandovi. In the middle of the 16th century, historians estimate more than 90% were Hindu. The transformation that followed unfolded slowly. It did not happen in a single year. It unfolded across generations. Temple destruction altered the visible landscape. Migration carried many Hindu families beyond Portuguese territory. Conversion increased within the Velas Conquistas. Each of these forces reshaped the population. The change becomes visible in the numbers. By the 17th century, the Hindu share of the population had fallen sharply. Churches rose where temples once stood. Parish networks expanded across Tiswadi, Pardesh, and Sastate. Missionaries reported growing congregations. Each decade added new Catholic families. A child baptized in one generation raised children within the church in the next. Parish registers slowly replaced temple records. Village festivals disappeared from public calendars. By the 18th century, many towns of the old conquest looked entirely different. Church towers rose above former temple sites. Processions followed new liturgical rhythms. The older sacred geography survived mostly in memory. By the early 19th century, the demographic balance had reversed. In the year 1812, Hindus formed roughly 1/4 of the population within the Velas Conquistas. A province that had once been overwhelmingly Hindu now became largely Catholic. But this was not the whole story of Goa. Beyond the borders of the old conquests, another landscape continued to exist. Across rivers and forested hills lay territories outside early Portuguese rule. These lands would later be called the Novas Conquistas, the new conquests. Places such as Ponda, Satari, and Canacona. These regions entered Portuguese control much later, mostly during the 18th century. By that time, the Portuguese Empire had weakened. Its armies were smaller. Its authority was less secure. Local Hindu chiefs still held influence. Temple networks remained central to village life. Destroying those temples could provoke rebellion. Colonial officials chose another approach. They governed through compromise. Temples were allowed to stand. Hindu landholders remained in place. Village rituals continued largely unchanged. In those regions, pilgrims still traveled between shrines. Festivals still filled village courtyards. When migrants from the old conquests arrived, they entered a world where dharma remained visible. So two different demographic patterns emerged. Inside the Velas Conquistas, Christian communities grew steadily. Beyond them, Hindu society remained dominant. Two religious landscapes now existed side by side. Church bells defined the public sound of the old conquests. Temple bells continued to ring in the interior. One province, two civilizational worlds. Understanding this division explains what happened next. Because the story of Goa did not end in 1812. History was still unfolding. History can describe suffering, but dharma must also judge it. Understanding an idea does not make that idea righteous. A belief may appear sincere, yet still stand in opposition to dharma. The tribunal in Goa believed it protected souls, but dharma evaluates power by different standards. The first test concerns Rajdharma, the duty of rulers. In the Mahabharata, Bhishma explains this duty clearly. A king protects the traditions of his people. He does not destroy their sacred institutions. Temples are not merely buildings, they are centers of Sanskriti. They preserve ritual, they preserve memory, they preserve the continuity of civilization. To dismantle temples by force violates the basic duty of a ruler. Protection has become persecution. Authority has become adharma. The second test concerns the nature of truth itself. The Rig Veda expresses a profound principle. Ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti. Truth is one. The wise speak of it in many ways. Different paths may approach the same ultimate reality. Different forms of worship may honor the same cosmic truth. A system that punishes alternate worship rejects that vision. It replaces spiritual humility with theological absolutism. The third test concerns justice. In the Arthashastra, Kautilya defines the purpose of law. Law exists to maintain order and protect subjects. Courts judge actions. They do not invade the private conscience. A tribunal that investigates belief inside homes abandons the limits of just governance. A lamp before a hidden murti becomes evidence. A whispered mantra becomes suspicion. Faith itself becomes a crime. Such a system transforms law into coercion. The Bhagavad Gita speaks about such moments. Yada yada hi dharmasya, glanir bhavati bharata. Whenever dharma declines and adharma rises, correction becomes necessary. Dharma therefore does not teach passive endurance. It teaches clarity about injustice. It teaches the defense of sacred institutions. It teaches vigilance. When rulers destroy the spiritual life of their subjects, their authority loses moral legitimacy. The tragedy of Goa reveals a simple lesson. Power separated from dharma becomes destructive. A court that punishes prayer cannot claim righteousness. And a civilization that forgets to protect its sacred life invites future vipatti. 2 centuries passed. Empires changed. Kings rose and fell across distant continents. Even the tribunal in Old Goa could not escape the passage of time. By the early 19th century, the world surrounding Portugal had begun to change. New political ideas moved across Europe. Old institutions weakened. Colonial systems struggled to maintain authority. In this shifting world, the Goa Inquisition slowly lost its power. By the year 1812, its authority had effectively ended. The tribunal that once examined belief no longer commanded the same fear. But history had already altered Goa. Within the Velas Conquistas, Catholic communities had become the majority. Church towers defined the skyline of many towns. Yet beyond those older territories, another Goa continued to exist. Across rivers and forested hills, the Novas Conquistas preserved a different landscape. Villages in Ponda, Sattari, and Canacona remained centered around temples. The deities carried away during earlier decades now stood within new sanctuaries. At Priol, the temple of Sri Mangesha flourished again. At Kavale, devotees gathered before Shanta Durga. At Mardol, the shrine of Mahalasa Narayani welcomed pilgrims. The sacred geography had moved, but it had not disappeared. Across generations, families preserve rituals and memory. When Goa finally joined the Republic of India in the year 1961, these different regions became one state. The old conquests, the new conquests, one land again. Today, the population of Goa reflects that long history. Most of its people once again identify as Hindu. Christian communities remain an important part of the region. 2 traditions now share the same landscape. Temples stand, churches stand. The bells of both can be heard across the fields. Vepatti leaves scars upon a civilization. Temples may fall, communities may scatter. Sacred geography may be broken. Yet dharma possesses a strange endurance. It survives in memory, it survives in migration, it survives in families who refuse to forget. The people who carried their murtis across rivers did more than save stone images. They preserved a civilization. And history teaches a quiet truth. Adharma may triumph for a time, but it cannot command eternity. Dharma endures longer than empires. I hope you enjoyed our 2-part series on the Goa Inquisition. This history is not easy. Even listening to it is difficult. But turning away from truth is far more dangerous. Our civilization has endured much, and now it is time to learn it, to understand it, and to preserve it. If you believe that honest, research based conversations about our past matter, then subscribe to this channel today. Turn on the bell notification and share this video with anyone who wants to seriously understand the history of India. Carry your heritage with dignity, in your thoughts, in your conduct, because an informed society becomes a strong society. I will see you again soon. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, Vande Matram.